Hola Chumbata. If, as some people were, you're looking for a more positive and upbeat review of something that I really liked, today we're going to be looking at a couple of supplements for Cyberpunk Red, and I'm afraid you are going to be disappointed. So, first thing to look at is Interface Red, which is a sort of reincarnation of the old Interface fanzine thing, which was, quarter the size, but a lot more useful, I'm afraid to say. This version of Interface is a collection of their online articles and PDFs all put together. In the UK it retails for about £15. Full colour, glossy paper, all of that. But even so, I did the maths, or mathematics, and it would have cost me less to presumably collect the PDF articles from online, put them together, have them printed and bound myself from lulu.com. I mean, there's always shipping, but I had to pay shipping anyway on these two books. This should not cost more than it will cost me print on demand to get a single copy printed for myself, which would have been about £13. Alright, it shouldn't cost that much, even taking into account interest and so on. So I feel ripped off and I feel annoyed, especially because the content wasn't really up to scratch either. One of the main reasons I decided to buy this was, while this stuff's available on the websites and so on, websites go away, people change things, who knows how long that site incarnation is going to be up, all these articles are going to be knocking about, so it's always good to have a hard copy backup. Hard copy. But one of the main reasons was to get this, which was about converting guns from Cyberpunk 2020 and so on into Cyberpunk Red. Shouldn't be too much of a big job, you would have thought. Shouldn't be too difficult to do. The main stickling point is, what do you do with things like anti-material rifles that do D10s of damage, as opposed to guns in Cyberpunk Red, which only ever do D6s? That's not covered, and basically the conversion rules consist of, okay, take the gun, find the thing it's closest to, make it mostly that, couple of other choices. If it's got any special capabilities or anything, it's considered an exotic weapon, and if it has any built-in attachments and so on, just consider them attachments. So there's not really anything here, but it might inspire me to do something a bit better. We shall see. We have a little mini adventure that's more of an encounter with one of these graph haulers, which appeared a lot in promo material for Cyberpunk 2077, but didn't really appear in the game so far as I remember. You're intercepting a shipment of weapons and cybernetics intended for some fascists, and there you go. It is really more like an encounter or something you might want to work into a larger adventure. It's a couple of pages. It's nothing really. Then we have a whole bunch of pre-generated characters, which feels like kind of cheap filler, really. Not terribly useful. If you're running one-shots or something, I suppose these might make good examples, and it shows you an idea of what they expect characters to be like when you generate them, but otherwise, who really cares? Cyber chairs, wheelchairs, or leg chairs in this case, rear their ugly head once more. If there was ever a game that already had disability inclusion, it's Cyberpunk. All these people with prosthetic limbs and cyber eyes and so on. Alright, many of them veterans. That's representation. And if ever there was a game where wheelchairs, leg chairs, whatever, doesn't make any sense, it's Cyberpunk. Because you can have cyber legs, you can have neural rewiring, you can be fixed in almost every conceivable way. Though in 2077, I believe there's some diseases that can't be cured that might call for it. But really, it's A, already there, and B, can be overcome by technology in the same way this stuff can be easily overcome with magic in fantasy worlds. So, why does this even exist? Malrepresentation, apparently. But do we allow that desire for malrepresentation to override everything else about a game, its setting, its themes, its technology, or its magic, or whatever else? What sense does this make other than to virtue signal? And I hate to use that phrase because it's a tainted phrase, but it is true. This serves virtually zero purpose. So that's a waste of time, and then much of the rest of it is a waste of time as well. About an MMO that can be played within the context of Cyberpunk Red. So you can play a character playing a character. If that were the central conceit for an RPG based around .hack or something, it's an idea I've toyed with in the past, then maybe I can see a point. But you don't play Cyberpunk to play Elflines in Cyberpunk as a character of your character. That's a swing and a miss. The mostly useful part ended up being the bit about drones. The drones were around in the old Cyberpunk 2020 days, but I think the way that real life has wound on and drones have become a thing, it makes sense to explore drones and remotes and so on more fully in a modern Cyberpunk game, in a similar way to the way that Cyberpunk 2020 got cell phones completely wrong. So, it is worth bringing this stuff in. However, right, look at this giraffe-looking motherfucker, right? It's enormous. It's the size of a pickup and then some, and it's an industrial beast, right? It's armoured, it's used in construction and so on. A normal person in Cyberpunk, well, let's flip back to our big list of NPCs, shall we? And let's choose a solo, if we can find one. Solo. Okay, how many hit points? Hit points. How many hit points does our solo have? 45, right? And he's got an armor of 11 on his locations where he's got armor. Right, what does this gigantic thing dwarfing the people around it have? It has 60 hit points, so only 15 more hit points, and 11 stopping power, the same as our solo. Right, you can take this thing down with small arms fire easily. Could you take out a bulldozer with small arms fire from a pistol or a submachine gun? If you got lucky and hit some of the hydraulics or some of the control surfaces, then maybe. But otherwise, you're going to be plinking away at a bulldozer, or a crane, which is essentially what this is, or a digger, all day without doing much except chipping the paintwork. It's the same problem that Cyberpunk Red has with all its vehicles. Is there a solution? I don't know. I need to do some more wrangling with it. I think if you could convert things more in line with maximum metal for Cyberpunk 2020 and use those rules, which should largely translate across okay, that might work. Or if you gave all vehicles and objects an inherent stopping power bonus equal to 1/10 of their hit points, then perhaps that might make more sense. So in that case, that would give it like 17 stopping power, and then an assault rifle would be doing like 5d6. So what's that? 7, 14, 17.5 damage on average, which, if we applied our bonus here, would mostly plink off or do, a couple of points of damage here and there. So that might work, but just vehicles in Cyberpunk Red don't work. They don't make sense. The hit points and so on just doesn't work at all. For the smaller drones, again, you would think they would be a little bit tougher, specifically the more combat-oriented ones, but they're not. They're kind of equal to or less than characters who aren't made of machinery and aren't inherently armoured. But it is nice to see the drones. That's the most useful thing, and it's not a problem with the drones, it's a problem with the Cyberpunk Red rules, really. So that's interface. Ironically, of course, Cyberpunk has always been about style over substance. Attitude is everything and live on the edge, and I always score in style and substance. Interface. Style 4. The cover's a bit shit, but the interior illustrations, taken as they are, seemingly largely from concept art and so on, those are great, those are good, that's fine. Layout's a bit meh, so actually let's make it style 3. Substance 1. This is absolutely not worth the money. There is not enough in here that is useful or usable to justify the expense. Download the articles, put them into a PDF, print it yourself at lulu.com. I mean, the intent of the online articles is for you to download and print them anyway, or keep them on your laptop, so I can't see them having an issue with that, but don't waste your money on this. So that's what, 2 out of 5, but it's a low 2. And then we have Tales of the Red, Street Stories. Now, I am not a fan of adventures normally, but in the past I've had good experiences with adventures specifically for Cyberpunk. So I was cautiously optimistic, and I also felt that because there's so little in the way of expansion material for Cyberpunk, this might contain nuggets of usefulness in terms of NPCs, gear, equipment, stuff, tailored to specific scenarios. There might be some more new vehicles and so on, so it might have utility beyond being an adventure book. I normally don't like adventure books because I write my own, but like I say, I've had good experiences with adventure books in the past. Night City Stories, for example, or the Land of the Free, Home of the Brave box set, or the Corporate War source books, Stormfront and that. Those were good. This, however, not so great. So it's hardback, costs about as much as a core book. Cyberpunk core book is, I think, about 300 pages. This is about 200 pages for about 35 quid. And again, I feel mugged. Associated with the interface. So we have a bunch of adventures in here, and I can't really spoiler them. That's always a problem with reviewing adventures, but I can give you a kind of overview, I suppose. A Night at the Opera brings back a couple of gangs that were missing from 2077. The Philharmonic Vampires and the Bozos are mentioned, and the Inquisitors. And it's like you get involved in a vampire LARP that's gotten out of hand. That's the adventure. It feels a bit cheesy, a bit camp, a bit like someone's working through their experiences in vampire LARP. So you would think that would be good for me, but no, sir. I don't like it particularly. Agents of Desire is more interesting. You're hired to find this guy's missing girlfriend, and you get to interact with Rogue, who you might know from 2077. And it turns out things are a little bit more complicated than they at first seem, which is nice. It's a good little noir detective story, so that one's okay. Then we have a bucket full of popcorn flavored kibble. This felt like filler, much like popcorn itself, really. And so that didn't really appeal to me so much. Where's the synopsis so I can do it justice? Yeah, so there always was a kind of studio district in Night City going back to the 2020 source book. And in this, you get a chance to get involved in that and to run security and be involved in a production. But of course, it's Cyberpunk, things go wrong. Drummer and the Whale is a sort of treasure hunt. If you did play the Corporate War series, a lot of that dealt with seaborne action and underwater action. So if you want a kind of flashback to your heyday of the dying days of 2020, there's a nice. It would make a good transition game if you were bringing 2020 characters forward to 2050 somehow, aging them 30 years and having them still be, good and competent. So there's some nice kind of familiarity between the closing adventures of 2020 and that as an adventure for Cyberpunk Red's sort of 2050 setting. Haven't a stitch to wear. It feels too kind of low key for Cyberpunk. Maybe some sort of commentary on the fashion industry, perhaps, but it gets you involved in problems around a courier company and that as well. It just feels a little bit too low-key. If you're running a very, very street game, then it might be good for you. Otherwise not. Reaping the Reaper is about some peculiar deaths that are going on. It apparently links to a previous adventure that I haven't been aware of. And it seems like a misstep not to have both adventures and have the one bleed into the other, include both in the book, and make it more complete. Again, this just feels a little bit too cheesy and obvious. Again, it's hard to review adventures because they're adventures and you don't want to give them away. Staying Vigilant is a confrontation with a cyber psycho who has apparently taken out several other crews. The problem I can see with this adventure is that the cyber psycho just isn't tough enough to represent any sort of challenge to a mildly competent player character group, and so the build-up will end up being a damp squib, unless you bend the rules, fudge the dice, or they get particularly lucky somehow. Bathed in Red is kind of a night out clubbing in an augmented reality club, and of course things go wrong. How do you get the characters there? Don't really know. Somehow, or it's just coincidental, whatever. But yeah, it's another you happen to be somewhere where things go wrong sort of adventure. Again, a bit cheesy, bit obvious, not that engaging. One Red Night is the last adventure. This one is how to describe it? It's a follow-up to the Bathed in Red adventure. it's another vigilante, so we've got kind of two vigilante adventures here. I can't really say too much more about it without giving it away, but again, it's a bit cheesy, a bit cheesemungus, and yeah, it doesn't really do it for me too much. The appendix has all the different gangs, mooks, characters, slightly updated and blown up map of Night City. Nothing on par with the old Night City sourcebook, of course. We could do with an update for that, frankly. And you got these little biographies for the characters, which honestly, most of them are short enough that they could have been included earlier in the book, so that they were there when you needed them and you didn't need to flip back and forth. So the real main problem with these is that they have a story flow depending which way characters decide to do certain things, but the layout makes that hard to decipher, and they could have done with like a story map, like introduction. Could go this way, could go that way. If you go this way, a conceptual map of how the adventure is meant to play out would be a useful thing to have here, and that's absent. The layout makes it kind of hard to read, especially when it gets short and punchy and chopped up. There's nothing that blows you away here. Only two of the stories are connected. One of them feels like the first half of the adventure is missing, because really it is, if you haven't picked it up elsewhere. And there's not a ton of useful reusable material here in terms of either NPCs or equipment or vehicles or anything else, which is why I was looking at it, largely because there's just not enough other material out there for Cyberpunk Red, so not especially useful. I might try and use some of it, but I'm going to have to do so much work to turn any of these adventures into a more satisfying story that I may as well not have bought it in the first place. And at this price, again, it's a bit high for what you get. Style, it's pretty enough, but the layout lets it down. The cover's a lot better than the one for Interface, but a bit dark and muddy, so you lose a lot of the details. I know I say that all the time. It's always a problem. So, style. All in all, considering this is like a second tier publisher and everything, a high 3 for style. In terms of substance, there is more here than an Interface, but it's still not terribly good. 2, so that's 5 out of 10, 2.5 out of 5, deeply mid. If you're the kind of person that has trouble coming up with ideas for adventures, you might find this more useful, but it really needs that conceptual map that I talked about to make it more playable. And again, maybe that's something that I'll do if I can be asked, but I really honestly feel like I was mugged off getting these two. Last thing, recently, if you're in the UK and you've been trying to get hold of Dungeon Crawl Classics dice, I managed to get a deal on these, but they can rush you as much as 40 quid. I got these, which is all the same peculiar dice from wish.com. You can also get them from Temu, and Amazon.co.uk now has sets. This is all the DCC dice, plus a D60, plus a D100 for around £10. So if you want to get into DCC or MCC, Mutant Crawl Classics, or you're just a fan of having peculiar dice and want to use them in your games, they are affordable now, and it's probably worth getting a set. I am tempted to start using some of these funky dice in some of my games because they do open up some other possibilities. Your mileage may vary. Zang. Activate 2.0 is the sequel and second edition to Activate, inspired by the likes of Global Frequency, Person of Interest, crypto, piracy, and other issues. This is a game where you play activists and experts brought together to change the world in a positive and meaningful way by mysterious forces lurking in the darker side of the internet. You can download it or buy the print version at all the usual places: post-mort.com, DriveThruRPG, and lulu.com.